You could never compare to your brother. I've heard that sentence so many times it's become a broken record, a dreary background track looping endlessly in my mind, never turning off. I'm 29 years old this year. My name is Rachel Moore, and if I had to pick one word to describe my place in my family, it would be shadow. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, in a small house with a backyard where bitter winters blanketed the eaves in snow, and summers carried the scent of wild grass and the hum of cicadas. On paper, I was the eldest daughter in a family of four. But in reality, I was more like a side character, invisible, a void existing only to serve as a backdrop for Eric, my younger brother, the golden child in my parents' eyes. From childhood, my achievements were always brushed aside. I vividly remember in elementary school when I won first place in a statewide writing competition. I brought home the certificate, my heart pounding, hoping my parents would be proud. But my father, Charles, barely glanced at it before saying, "Nice, I guess. But why don't you try debate like Eric? That's the kind of skill a boy needs." My mother, Linda, meanwhile, looked at Eric with glowing eyes as he boasted about being chosen as the soccer team captain. My certificate was shoved into a drawer, left to gather dust as if it never existed. In high school, I worked tirelessly, staying in the top of my class for all 4 years. On graduation day, I gave a speech in front of hundreds of peers and teachers. But at the family dinner afterward, I overheard my mother telling a neighbor, "Eric's about to get into law school. He's so talented, he's going to be a huge success." Not a single person mentioned me, the kid who'd just been honored as valedictorian. The feeling of being overlooked wasn't a single devastating blow, but 1,000 tiny pinpricks, slowly hardening my heart. I learned to force a smile, to stay silent, and to tell myself, one day, when I'm good enough, they'll see me. In early 2018, I was grown and had left Buffalo to live independently. I worked as a freelance marketer, a path no one in my family really understood. My dad said, "What kind of job is that? No stability, no benefits, just kid stuff." My mom gave a faint smile. "As long as you can take care of yourself and don't burden the family, that's fine." In truth, I was starting to make a name for myself. Small campaigns for local coffee shops and restaurants brought in enough to cover rent and save a little. I'd even signed a contract with a retail company to handle their regional promotions, a huge step forward for me, a chance to prove myself. But to the Moore family, it was as if none of it existed. Eric, by then, had become a young lawyer at a prestigious firm. Whenever he walked into the house in his crisp suit, my parents couldn't stop bragging. "This is our son, Eric Moore, the lawyer. He's smart, decisive, with a bright future ahead." Meanwhile, when I mentioned running a marketing campaign worth tens of thousands of dollars, they'd nod half-heartedly. "As long as you're happy, I guess." The loneliness didn't come from living alone in my small apartment, but from knowing no one in my own family saw me. Some nights, I stayed up late at my computer, finishing a marketing plan, imagining my parents reading about my successful campaign in the local paper. I pictured them calling me, saying, "Rachel, we're so proud of you." But the next morning, when I picked up the phone, all I heard was my mom's voice scolding. "Come home for dinner this weekend. Eric's going to talk about his law firm. You should listen and learn instead of messing around with that trivial stuff." I swallowed hard. That trivial stuff was my work, my dreams, my everything. Sometimes I felt like a stranger in my own home. Family dinners were a perfect example. Charles would sit there, eyes gleaming as Eric talked about his latest case. Linda would pour more wine, praising him endlessly. I'd sit quietly, picking at my vegetables, trying to suppress the feeling of being abandoned. No one asked me about my life or my work. I was like an empty chair. There or not, it didn't matter. But deep down, I still held on to hope. I believed that if I worked harder, if I succeeded more, they'd have to acknowledge me. I wouldn't always be a shadow. I remember one winter evening, snow falling thick on Buffalo's streets. I came home from work, my coat soaked with icy water. Sitting by my apartment window, watching the golden streetlights reflect on the snow, I wondered, when will they ever truly see me? A faint voice in my head whispered, maybe tomorrow, or maybe never. And in that moment, I realized I was standing at the threshold of a different journey. One I didn't know where it would lead, but it would be nothing like the decades of pain I'd endured. I'm sharing this story not to complain, but because I believe there are others out there who felt like a shadow in their family, their job, their life. If you've ever been compared, belittled, or longed for a word of recognition that never came, you'll understand me. Have you ever thought about how a single compliment could heal a childhood, while a cold glance could destroy someone's self-worth? If you've been through it, leave a comment so I know I'm not alone. Have you ever made a decision that in a single moment sent your life in a completely different direction? For me, it was the spring of 2019, the day I set aside the biggest contract of my life to save a dying grocery store, my family's store. I remember that day clearly. I'd just signed a deal with a major supermarket chain. The contract was worth $40,000, a figure that, for a freelancer like me, was a golden ticket to a thriving career. I held the contract, tears of joy streaming down my face. I thought, this time, they'll see me. But then the phone rang. It was my mom, her voice trembling, sobbing. Rachel, the store's about to go under. We're drowning in debt, suppliers are cutting us off, and customers are disappearing. If we lose it, we'll have nothing left. Moore's Grocery was where I grew up, where I spent my childhood summers behind the counter, learning to count change down to the penny. It wasn't just a store, it was our family's legacy. My dad's voice came through, hoarse, admitting defeat for the first time. We can't hold on anymore, kid. I went silent. On one side was the future I'd dreamed of. On the other, a family on the brink. And then I knew what I'd choose. I picked up the phone, my voice breaking as I told the supermarket rep, I'm sorry, I can't continue with the contract. From that moment, I returned to Buffalo. I walked into the familiar store, its dusty shelves and flickering lights heavy with the stench of failure. My parents sat at the counter, exhausted. Eric wasn't there. He was too busy at his law firm, rarely setting foot in the place. I got to work. I wrote a radio ad. Moore's Grocery, Buffalo's hometown store, now with new deals for you. I printed thousands of flyers, hand-delivering them to mailboxes around the neighborhood. I stayed up designing posters, hanging them on every lamppost and community board. I negotiated with suppliers, promising the campaign would bring customers back, begging for more time to pay off debts. I smiled through exhaustion, chatting with old customers, hoping they'd return. Day after day, I lived like a warrior, fueled by coffee and a desperate need to save my family. And then, a miracle happened. 3 months later, customers flooded back. Revenue doubled, debts were paid off bit by bit. The gloom lifted, replaced by laughter and the constant chime of the cash register. I sat alone in the stockroom, staring at stacks of sales receipts, a spark of hope rising. This time they'll see me. One evening, my parents called me home. I thought they'd thank me, maybe just say, Rachel, you saved us. I sat at the dinner table, heart racing. But then my mom looked at Eric, eyes glowing, and said, from now on, you'll manage the store. I froze. I stared at Eric, who hadn't spent a single hour behind the counter or taped up a single poster, now smiling confidently, adjusting his tie. I turned to my dad. What? I did everything, and Eric? He cut me off. Eric's a lawyer. He's got a head for management, for planning. You just held things together temporarily. This is his job now. My heart felt crushed. Every effort, every sleepless night, every tear, all erased in a single sentence. Eric leaned back, smirking. Not bad, Rachel. I'll take it from here and do it better. I wanted to scream, to slam the table and yell, I'm the one who saved this store. Without me, it'd be rubble. But the cold looks from my parents choked me. I forced a smile, bowed my head, and hid the pain, as I'd done for years. That night, I drove aimlessly around Buffalo, the familiar streets blurred under golden streetlights. In the rearview mirror, I saw a tired face, eyes red. I asked myself, what did I do wrong? Why can't they see me? But as always, I told myself, be patient. One day they'll have to see you. I didn't realize that this hope was turning me into a puppet of their favoritism, used and erased over and over. Does this story make you ache for me? Have you ever sacrificed your future for something precious to your family, only to be pushed aside like an outsider? If this resonates, leave a Y in the comments. If you think I was just foolish, leave an N. If someone asked me what moment was the final straw, I'd say without hesitation, it was Eric's wedding. The day I realized I'd always be a puppet in the Moore family's hands. In 2021, Eric announced he was marrying Lindsay, a sweet, polite girl who always kept her distance from me. Before I could even think about my role, my parents dumped the responsibility on me without asking. Rachel, handle everything, my mom, Linda, said curtly, like it was an order. Venue, flowers, band, menu, all of it. Your brother's busy, and as the older sister, you need to step up. Don't let him worry. I froze, staring at her. Eric had never lifted a finger for anything. I wanted to protest, but my dad, Charles, folded his newspaper and added coldly, "Don't dawdle. This is the most important day of your brother's life. Don't mess it up." I knew I had no choice. They didn't ask, "Can you handle it? Do you want to help?" To them, I was just the backdrop ready to carry the load. I dove in. I found a wedding venue on the outskirts of Buffalo, classy but affordable. I called dozens of vendors, haggling for the best prices. I chose white roses over imported orchids, booked a local band instead of a quartet from Pittsburgh. I crafted a menu with barbecue, mashed potatoes, and summer salad. Elegant yet budget-friendly. But weeks later, Eric started intervening. One Sunday morning, as I was finalizing contracts, Eric texted, "Sis, Lindsay wants that famous DJ from Cleveland. Book him." I replied, "The budget can't cover it. That DJ costs thousands." He shot back, "Figure it out. Don't embarrass me." I gripped my phone, my heart stinging. Why was it always me who had to figure it out? Why did his extravagant wishes matter more than my blood and sweat? It didn't stop there. A few days later, Eric called. "Napa Valley champagne, vintage, order it, and add Canadian lobster for the dinner. Lindsay wants it." I was speechless. "Eric, do you realize a bottle of that champagne is over $500? Lobster's way out of budget. I've already drained my savings, $10,000 for deposits. I've got nothing left." He scoffed. "That's why you're always cheap. This isn't some family barbecue. It has to be perfect." I dropped the phone, hands shaking. $10,000, my entire savings from years of work, was tied up in a wedding they didn't even credit me for. That night, I went to my parents for dinner, hoping they'd understand. But when I explained, Linda brushed me off. "Rachel, stop whining. You need to think bigger. This is your brother's one and only day. Don't be stingy and ruin it." Charles sipped his wine, not even looking up. "Eric deserves the best. Don't let him down." I sat there, my throat tight with bitterness. All my life, they'd never said I deserved anything. The weeks that followed were exhausting. I stayed up tweaking contracts, calling venues, apologizing to vendors for last-minute changes. Every time I tried, Eric threw another absurd demand. Lindsay just smiled faintly, avoiding my eyes, knowing full well I was being crushed. Over and over I asked myself, why am I still doing this? The answer always came, because I still hope, just once, they'll see my worth. But then came the fateful night. The evening before the wedding, we sat around the dinner table. The air was heavy. Eric lounged in his chair, scrolling his phone. Lindsay tapped her spoon nervously. I was exhausted, eyes sunken, hands stained with ink from signing contracts. Suddenly, Eric looked up, announcing, "Tomorrow, upgrade the menu, add lobster and that champagne we talked about, and hire that photographer from Pittsburgh, the one who shot for the governor. Top tier." I went still. I set my fork down, took a deep breath. "Eric, it's impossible. You know I've paid almost everything with my savings. They're gone. There's nothing left to add." Eric laughed, mocking. "You're always complaining. Don't you get it? This is the biggest day of my life. One day, and you can't even handle it?" Linda slammed her glass down, her eyes icy. "He's right. This is your brother's one shot at marriage. Rachel, you're being selfish, only thinking about your money." Charles added, his voice gravelly, "Don't ruin tomorrow. Don't embarrass this family." I looked at them, my heart twisting. For years, I'd sacrificed, carried their burdens, paid with everything I had. And now, after pouring out my blood and tears, they still saw me as a spare part, an obstacle. I said softly, my voice shaking but firm. I've done all I can, but I can't keep going. If you think I'm selfish, remember I gave up my future and $10,000 for this family. Eric laughed mockingly, turning to Lindsay. See? I told you, she's always half-assed, never does enough. Linda stared at me, her words sharp as knives. Rachel, the best gift you could give your brother tomorrow is to disappear. The room fell silent. My heart pounded, ready to burst. Eric leaned back, a smug grin on his face. Charles looked down, saying nothing. Lindsay fidgeted with her ring. I stood up. The chair scraped against the wooden floor. I looked at them one last time, the family I'd hoped would love me, and I knew in that moment my patience was done. I said quietly, "Fine, if that's what you want." I grabbed my keys and walked out. The door slammed shut behind me like a final period. If you want to hear more stories and struggles like mine and feel a connection to them, you can check out my previous videos on this channel. There are mornings when you wake up and know nothing will ever be the same. For me, it was the morning after that fateful night when my mom bluntly said, "The best gift you could give your brother is to disappear." I sat on my bed, dim light filtering through the curtains. The rented room I was staying in Buffalo suddenly felt foreign. On the table, my budgeting notebook lay open, a red note glaring. Savings, $10,000, spent on the wedding. I stared at the number, and a strange resolve stirred within me. If they wanted me to disappear, I would. But before I left, I'd take back the one thing that was mine, my effort and my money. I picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and called the first number, the catering company. "Hi, this is Rachel Moore. I want to cancel the order for tomorrow's wedding. I paid a $4,000 deposit." There was a pause, then the coordinator stammered, You're sure? Tomorrow's a big event." "I'm sure. As the contract holder, I'm requesting a refund per the agreement." I hung up, my hands trembling slightly. Then I called the florist, the band, the decor rental company. Each time I said, "I'm canceling the contract," a weight lifted off me. By noon, I'd recovered nearly all my savings, minus a few non-refunded fees. For the first time in years, I felt in control. The next day, Eric's wedding took place. Or rather, it fell apart. I didn't attend. I only heard about it from mutual friends and, in part, through my mom's furious voicemails. Guests arrived dressed to the nines, expecting a lavish ceremony. But when they entered the venue, they found empty tables. No tablecloths, no flowers, no buffet. The stage was bare, no band, no music. Even the wedding cake was gone. People whispered and gossiped. Lindsay stood frozen in her white dress, face pale. Eric, red-faced, ran around yelling at staff. My mom called me relentlessly, her voice screaming through my voicemail. "Rachel, what have you done? You've destroyed this family." I listened to her messages in silence. There was no regret, only a quiet sadness. The truth was, they'd destroyed the family long ago, with their favoritism, their cruel words, their erasure of me. I'd simply stopped playing the savior. Eric later posted on social media, fuming. "My sister Rachel ruined the happiest day of my life out of jealousy and selfishness." Comments from relatives and old friends piled on. "What a shame. Who does that to their own family?" But oddly, their accusations didn't pierce me anymore. I was too used to being misunderstood. That afternoon, I started packing. My small Buffalo apartment was soon filled with cardboard boxes. I didn't take much. Just some clothes, my laptop, a few old books, and a small wooden box of keepsakes. I looked around the room one last time. The four walls where I'd cried over being belittled, where I'd hoped for a call of recognition from my parents, now just an empty shell. I bought a bus ticket to Asheville, North Carolina, a place that held a faint, beautiful memory from a past trip. Green mountains, peaceful air. Maybe it would be where my new chapter began. Before leaving Buffalo, I got one more call. It was my mom, her voice choked with anger. "Do you hate us that much, Rachel? Do you know how humiliated Eric was? People laughed at this family. You're an ungrateful daughter." I held the phone to my ear, listening without responding. Then I hung up and slipped it into my pocket. For the first time in my life, I felt no need to justify myself. I just wanted silence and to leave. On the bus out of Buffalo, I sat by the window. The familiar city faded behind me, its rain-soaked streets and small shops blurring in my vision. I rested my head against the glass, my heart empty yet strangely light. I'd lost my family, yes, but had I ever truly had them? Outside, dusk settled. Streetlights streaked by like faint trails of light. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. A voice in my mind said, "Rachel, you're free, you chose yourself." Tears fell, but this time not from pain, from relief. I cried for the girl who'd spent years enduring, pushed to the breaking point. And I cried for a new beginning, uncertain but full of possibility. As the bus crossed the Pennsylvania state line, I opened my laptop and typed a few lines. I'll start over, somewhere new, with myself. Never had my words felt so powerful. Have you ever stepped onto unfamiliar ground and felt like you'd just escaped a suffocating cage? For me, that was the day I stepped off the bus in Asheville, North Carolina. The early spring air was crisp, a stark contrast to Buffalo's heaviness. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood green and vast, like arms embracing the city. I dragged my old suitcase, equal parts excited and terrified. In my pocket, just a few $1,000s, money reclaimed from the wedding disaster. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel weighed down. I felt free. I rented a small apartment with one bedroom and a window overlooking the red-tiled roofs of old buildings. Each morning, sunlight spilled into the room, making me believe I could start again. But how? I barely knew anyone in this city. One morning, I wandered into a bakery on Lexington Street. The warm scent of pastries drew me in. The owner, a woman in her 50s with a round figure and a radiant smile, introduced herself. "I'm Shirley Bennett, you new here?" My bewildered expression must have answered for me. I nodded, mentioning briefly that I was a freelance marketer who'd just moved from New York. Shirley laughed. "Well, that's perfect. I've been wanting to promote my bakery. Want to give it a shot?" That was my first client in Asheville. I redesigned their sign, set up a Facebook page, and ran a few small ads. Within 2 weeks, foot traffic noticeably increased. Shirley was so thrilled she gave me free bread every morning. More importantly, she introduced me to her friends, owners of a cafe, an art gallery, an outdoor gear shop. From one small gig, I quickly landed 4 or 5 more clients. My marketing work stabilized, and for the first time, I felt my skills were valued, not with empty words, but with trust and real results. Beyond work, I rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten. A local hiking group posted a call for new members. I joined, and on weekends, we trekked trails to the top of Black Balsam Knob, where the wind whipped through my hair and the view stretched endlessly. Each step on those trails washed away the sting of my family's criticism, the memories of those bitter dinner tables. I also picked up painting, a hobby my mom once mocked as useless. I bought watercolors, painting mountains, quiet roads, and the cafes where I worked. My apartment filled with artwork, but to me, it wasn't clutter. It was proof I was living for myself. One afternoon, while editing a campaign for an art gallery, my phone buzzed. It was Nathan, my college friend still in Buffalo. His voice carried a mix of sadness and a faint smile. "Rachel, you won't believe what just happened. Moore's Grocery. It's gone bankrupt." I froze. Nathan explained. After I left, Eric took full control. He tried changing strategies, stocking expensive inventory, running flashy but clueless ads. Suppliers cut them off for unpaid debts. Customers vanished. Within 6 months, the store closed for good. As for Eric, he lost his job and his fiancée. Lindsay called off the engagement, returning the ring. My parents, Linda and Charles, sold the old house and moved to a cheap rental on the outskirts. I sat still, my heart racing. A storm of emotions swirled inside me. Part of me felt sorrow for the place where I'd grown up, where I'd poured my future to save. But another part felt relief, as if a long, painful chapter had finally closed. Nathan paused, then asked, "Are you angry?" I shook my head, though he couldn't see. "No, what's the point? Maybe this is the consequence they had to face." That night, I sat by my window, gazing at the distant mountains. I pictured my parents packing up the house, Eric quietly taking down the Moore's grocery sign. There was no hatred in me, just a quiet sadness, like bidding farewell to an old ship leaving the dock. But I knew I couldn't go back. I'd chosen Asheville, chosen my own path, and for the first time, I felt light knowing the past no longer bound me. Asheville became my home. I grew used to mornings at Shirley's Bakery, evenings painting, weekends hiking. I built relationships with clients, landed long-term contracts. My income stabilized, enough to buy a pinewood desk and some plants for my windowsill. One day, Shirley looked at me, smiling warmly. "Rachel, you're different from when we first met. You seem freer now." I nodded, my heart warm. "I am. I've finally found myself." You might wonder, do I still think about my family? Yes, sometimes. When I see a grocery store sign, I think of Moore's. When I hear talk of weddings, I recall that night before Eric's. But those memories no longer choke me. They're just scars, reminders that I survived and learned to stand tall. I'm sharing this to show you that sometimes, to be reborn, you have to let the old life collapse. And when you let go of the burden, you'll find your wings were always there. You just hadn't dared to fly. Asheville gave me those wings. There are things you think you'll never receive, and then one day, they show up at your doorstep, like a final test for your heart. For me, it was a letter from Buffalo. It was a cold winter morning in Asheville. Snow dusted the rooftops, my breath turning to white mist. I'd just returned from Shirley's Bakery when I saw an old envelope in my mailbox. The edges were worn, the handwriting shaky but familiar. Linda Moore. My heart raced. How long had it been since I'd heard from my family? I grabbed the letter, hands trembling, and hurried inside to my pinewood desk. I stared at the envelope, hesitant, as if opening it might reopen old wounds. But finally, I tore it open. The first line blurred my vision. "Rachel, I know you probably never want to hear from us again, but I have to write, because this might be my last chance." I read on, each word heavy as stone. "We were wrong. All our lives, your dad and I only saw Eric, never you. I thought you were strong, that you could handle yourself, so I never praised you, never hugged you. Now I see that was cruel. The store is gone. Eric failed, Lindsay left him. Your dad, Charles, has a serious heart condition, needing long-term treatment. And me, I've lost the house, living in a rundown rental. I'm not writing to ask for money or to pull you back. I just want you to know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for making you feel invisible all these years. I hope you can forgive us. Not to go back to how things were, but so you can be happy. Don't let hatred hold you captive anymore. Live the life you deserve." I dropped the letter, tears streaming down my face. My mom's clumsy words cut like knives, both painful and bittersweet. Part of me had longed for this apology, but why now when everything was in ruins? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching streetlights glow on the snow. Memories flooded back, holding up certificates no one cared about, nights pouring my heart into saving the store only to be sidelined. That evening, my mom coldly told me to disappear. The wounds were still raw, but in the howling wind outside, I heard something else. The truth that I was no longer the girl desperate for approval. I'd moved far from Buffalo, built my own life, and I didn't need their validation to exist. Forgiveness? Could I do it? The next morning, I took a blank card and picked up a pen. My hand shook, but my heart was clear. I wrote, "Mom, I got your letter. I cried a lot reading it. I'm not coming back to Buffalo because my life belongs elsewhere now, but I'm enclosing a small amount, hoping it helps with Dad's treatment. You're right, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means freeing myself. I choose to forgive, for my own peace. I hope you and Dad find the peace I've found." I tucked a small check into the envelope. Not much, just enough for some medical costs. Then I mailed it, feeling as if I'd set down a heavy stone. That afternoon, I opened my small wooden box, where I kept my most precious things. I placed my mom's letter inside, alongside some paintings I'd done when I first arrived in Asheville. To me, it was symbolic, the past and present in one box, but I chose to live in the present, leaving the past to rest. The days that followed felt normal. I met clients at cafes, planned campaigns for an outdoor gear shop, sipped hot lattes at Shirley's. But something had shifted. Buffalo's shadow no longer clung to me. One weekend evening, I hiked with friends to Black Balsam Knob. The wind roared, the sky clear, mountains stretching to the horizon. I sat down, took a deep breath, and laughed. I realized I was no longer anyone's shadow. I was Rachel Moore, and I was in charge of my life. Shirley looked at me, smiling kindly. Kid, you look different now, lighter, more confident. I nodded. Because I've finally learned to forgive, not for them, but for me. Have you ever felt that? When you let go of resentment and realize your shoulders are free, like you've shed chains? Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the old cycle of pain. It means cutting it off for good. I chose that path. And from this moment, I know the days ahead will no longer be bound by the past. Maybe after hearing my story, you'll see that in every family, love isn't always given fairly. I was once a shadow, sacrificing myself to the point of forgetting who I was, crying endless tears just for a shred of recognition. But in the end, what I learned is this: your worth doesn't lie in others' validation, but in how you choose to live for yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing everything or returning to a cycle of hurt. It means letting go of the burden, freeing your heart, and moving forward lighter. I found peace in Asheville, among new friends who value me, and I believe you deserve to live a life that's truly yours, too. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Subscribe to my channel to catch more heartfelt stories. I'd love to hear your own experiences. Maybe your story will inspire someone else.